Hey everybody, Gladys Strickland here with the Art and History in Fiction podcast. This is episode 2, and today I want to talk about some of the medieval places to see in Beverley, England. Beverley is in East Yorkshire, England. Though overshadowed by York, 30 miles to the northwest, Beverley is home to several medieval buildings and sites. And Beverley is special to me because it is 10 miles south of where I lived in England. The year I was there, I visited quite often, volunteering at a charity shop, researching my thesis in the Minster and library, and shopping along Tollgavel. I even chose Beverley as the primary setting for my novel, The Stonemason's Secret. Beverley in the Middle Ages. Beverley was founded about 700 CE by John of Beverley, Bishop of York. It began as a church and monastery, which John retired to and lived in until his death in 721. His relics were placed in the monastery, and after his canonization in 1038, his tomb became an object of veneration, drawing pilgrims to the growing town that developed nearby. By 1377, Beverley was the 11th most populated town in England, about half the size of York. The main industry was the cloth trade of Beverley cloth, a woolen cloth made entirely in town, exported to Spain and Flanders. Wool was also traded with cloth-making towns in the Low Country. The cloth trade supported other related trades such as dyers, weavers, shearmen, and fullers. Tanning and bricklaying also flourished by the late Middle Ages, and there was a prosperous guild of minstrels in town. Beverleyminster. The most prominent feature in Beverley is the Minster, officially known as the Church of St. John the Evangelist. The original church was founded by St. John of Beverley and was destroyed, then refounded in the 10th century as a collegiate church. That church was enlarged and added to through the centuries until a fire in 1188 swept through Beverley and damaged the building. Rebuilding began in 1190. Then the central tower fell in 1213, damaging the choir and adjoining areas of the transept. Rebuilding began again in 1220, and the Minster as we know it today was the result. Among the construction highlights, 1260, the eastern part of the church was built, with aisled choir, retro choir, chapter house, main transept, and crossing completed. Work likely stopped due to lack of funds. 1305, masons were recalled, indicating work was resuming. 1335, William de Malton was appointed Master Mason. 1348 or 49, work stopped because of the Black Death. 1390 to 1420, the nave and west end with 2 towers was completed. The Minster measures 330 feet in length, making it 3/4 the size of York Minster. It also follows the same plan as York, with a main transept, secondary transept in the chapel, central tower, and 2 towers on the west facade. There was also an octagonal chapter house at Beverley, which was destroyed in 1550, and the central tower fell, but the stub remains. So is Beverley a minster or a cathedral? For a church so large, one might think it is a cathedral. A cathedral means the church is the seat of a bishop, not the size of the building. A minster refers to a church that was connected to a monastery. Beverley is not the seat of a bishop, so it is not a cathedral. York Minster, however, is the seat of the Archbishop of York, and its official name is the Cathedral and Metropolitan Church of St. Peter in York. It is both a cathedral and a minster, while Beverley is just a minster. Interior decorations of Beverleyminster. The most significant medieval decoration in Beverley are the 76 figures of medieval musicians spread throughout the building. While many of the figures and instruments have been damaged or restored, they still represent the largest collection of carvings of medieval instruments in the world and are a great resource for scholars. The figures can be seen as follows: 27 along the north nave aisle wall, 3 on the south aisle wall. Those are badly damaged and there isn't much left of them. 21 on the central nave arcade columns, 5 in the reredos in the east end, 7 on the Percy tomb canopy, and 7 on the 16th century misericords, which are the wooden seats that fold down in the choir stalls. There are 68 of these misericords in Beverleyminster, and they are the largest number in any church in England. Other interior decorations of note: St. John of Beverley's tomb is marked in the floor of the nave with a small plaque. The Norman font that survived the 1188 fire is in the south aisle. And there are 2 medieval tombs of note. There is the 14th century Two Sisters tomb located in the nave south aisle near the font. It is rather plain compared to the Percy tomb on the north side of the choir. The Percy tomb was constructed in the 1350s and is considered one of the finest examples of stone carving at the time. Both it and the Two Sisters tomb feature an ogee arch in the canopy above it. And for me, what is perhaps most amazing about the Percy tomb, it survived the Reformation without damage. The great east window is made above the tracery from the early 15th century, when it replaced an earlier window. All the medieval stained glass that has survived is located in that window now. The minster, and especially the minstrel figures, are very important to me. They were the subject of my master's degree thesis, and now, over 30 years later, I've made them the subject of my main character's research in the Stonemason's Secret. Beverley Friary. East of the minster, on Friars Lane, stands the Beverley Friary, or Old Friary. Established in the early 13th century by the Dominicans, the first buildings were probably of timber. As the community flourished, additional buildings were added, including guest quarters in the early 14th century. I have found several references stating that Chaucer mentioned the friary in the Canterbury Tales, but I have yet to find where that is. If anyone knows where that is in the Canterbury Tales, please let me know. In 1539, the Dissolution of the Monasteries Act closed the monastery. Everything except the guest quarters was torn down. Those quarters, or rather the ones built on the footings with leftover bricks, have remained in use since then. Restoration work found a 15th century wall painting and a paneled room that dates to the late 16th or early 17th century. And these can be seen on the interior of the friary. I have set the prologue to the Stonemason's Secret in the friary, and I have also added a medieval monk's journal to the items found during the most recent restorations. It is the release of the journal's translation that triggers the events in the book. I visited the friary during my stay in England and even attended a concert there during the Beverley Early Music Festival in 1989. Today, the friary operates as a hostel. Yes, you can stay in the old friary on your visit to Beverley. Wednesday Market. A few blocks north of the Minster, on a triangular piece of land between Eastgate and Highgate, is Beverley's original market. It began larger than it is now and has shrank through the years as shops and buildings have been erected around it. A second market on the north side of town began and grew, and as it did, this market became known as the Wednesday Market. I walked through the Wednesday Market many times on my way to the Minster for research. Beverley Market. In the 12th century, a new market grew north of town. Known as Saturday Market, it became the primary market in Beverley and is still used today. The Archbishop of York was the lord of the manor of Beverley and had the right to charge tolls on the market stallholders. Tollgavel, the street that leads to the market from the south, may have been where the tolls were charged. The market is also where I saw Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales do a walkabout on my birthday in 1988. St. Mary's, Beverley. St. Mary's sits on the north side of Beverley, near the north end of the market and inside the North Bar. It began as a chapel dedicated to St. Mary and in 1269 became a parish church. As a daughter church of Beverleyminster, it was adopted as the parish church by many of the craft guilds in town. Cruciform in shape, St. Mary's is 197 feet long with an aisled nave and chancel, transept, and crossing tower. A rebuilding campaign began in the late 13th century. Halted in the mid-14th century by the Black Death, it resumed around 1400 when the west front was added along with a clerestory to the nave. In 1520, the central tower collapsed and was rebuilt. Those who gave money for the piers of the North Arcade are noted on hood mold stops. Among the donors was the Minstrel Guild, who are represented by the 5 minstrels on a pillar against the pier. The Minstrel Guild was still prominent and a wealthy part of Beverley into the 16th century and was quite able to afford such a donation. If you look at pictures of the minstrel pillar, you will note the bright colors it is painted. That's how most carvings were decorated in the medieval period. Try to imagine the minstrel carvings in the minster painted a similar color scheme, which they are believed to have been. Gives a very different look to the minster interior. Another interior feature of St. Mary's is the painted wood ceilings dating from the 15th and 16th century. Stars on a blue background decorate the nave ceiling, while over the main chancel is the ceiling of kings. 40 kings of England are depicted. However, at the time it was painted, there weren't yet 40 kings of England. 36 are actual kings, while 4 were made up to complete the set and fill the space. Another fun carving to seek out in St. Mary's is a rabbit on the frame of an interior doorway leading to St. Michael's Chapel in the sacristy. Carved about 1330, it is thought to represent the messenger hare from the 13th century fable by Odo of Charenton. What makes this carving so interesting, however, is its connection with literature. Charles Ludwig, better known as Lewis Carroll, visited St. Mary's several times in his life. There is speculation that the carved rabbit was the inspiration for the white rabbit that leads Alice down the hole to Wonderland. As with the minster, St. Mary's choir stalls are decorated with misericords and are a fun thing to take a look at while you are there. Though the minstrel pillar didn't figure in my thesis research, being carved 200 years after the minstrel figures in the minster, it was always fun to visit the church and take in the brightly painted carving and interior. North Bar. Beverley was not a walled town, but by the 13th century several formal gateways were in place to control attacks on the city. The North Bar is the only surviving one. The bars also provided a way to collect tolls for those wishing to enter. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the bar also served as a viewing gallery for the town governors during the Corpus Christi festival plays. In 1409, the North Bar was rebuilt in brick and then renovated in the 17th century. The brick bar abuts buildings on both sides. The north side has buttresses on either side of the central archway, while above the center point is a carved stone cartouche of a coat of arms. The north bar is still in use, but instead of paying tolls, you have to wait for the traffic light to allow single-file auto traffic through. Street names. Walking through Beverley, you will notice many street names that have origins in the medieval town. Some are obvious. Friars Lane is where the Friary is located, but others aren't well known. So here's a sample. Lairgate, which means den or resting place of wild animals. Keldgate, which was located where the South Bar or the Keldgate Bar was and means spring or fountain. Minster Moorgate, Walkergate, Tollgavel, Butcher Row, we can imagine what that referred to, Ladygate, Dog and Duck Lane, Swabby's Yard, Dyer Lane, Well Lane. With so much to see in surrounding areas, it would be easy to give Beverley a miss. If you are interested in medieval history and architecture, please plan to spend a day or two there and see the wonderful buildings and sites from Beverley's medieval past. Thank you for listening to the second episode of the Art and History and Fiction podcast. Show notes will include links to all the places I mentioned, including images, so you can take a look for yourself and see what's there. And I hope if you get the chance, you will visit Beverley. Until next time.